we're going to do a little review of some 6th grade concepts plus a little bit of an additional proportions concept with 7th grade so that we can talk about some word problems. So what we're going to look at in this video are 3 concepts: fractions, decimals, and percents, proportions and percents, and word problems, which specifically we're going to talk about commission problems. So let's go through fractions, decimals, and percents. We've already talked about fractions to decimals and decimals to fractions. We would just read this. This would be 1 divided by 4. So if I did that 1 divided by 4, my answer would be 25 hundredths. And again, I could read this as 25 hundredths and I could reduce it to get 1/4. So we've been practicing this in previous modules. Well, now what we're going to do is we're going to add this new piece. We're going to add this piece of a percent. So we should be able to switch from fraction, decimal, percent. It doesn't matter which one we start with. If I start with a decimal, I should get the fraction and percent. If I start with the percent, I can get the fraction and decimal. So we know how to go with fractions and decimals back and forth. Let's talk about how percents and decimals go back and forth, and that'll help us. It's easy to get the fraction from there. So if we want to move and change decimals to percents, what we're going to do is we're going to move the decimal 2 places to the right and add a percent sign. So we're going to take this decimal, 25 hundredths. We're going to move 2 places to the right. So now this is the number 25. It's no longer 25 hundredths. And we're going to add a percent sign. So that's how it changes from a decimal to a percent. Now, conversely, to go from a percent to a decimal, we're just going to do the opposite. We're going to move the decimal 2 places to the left and take away the percent sign. So I'm going to drop the percent sign. The decimal stays here, so I'm going to move 2 places to the left. So that's going to place the decimal there, which gives us 25 hundredths. So that's how we go between fractions, decimals, and percents. So what we're going to do right here is we're going to practice it 3 times, starting with each different one, and find the other 2. So here we have a fraction, 3/5. Now we can change 3/5 into a decimal quite easily. We can say this is 3 divided by 5. Well, we know 5 cannot go into 3. It goes 0 times. We're going to add a 0. And 5 goes into 36 times. And it ends. So it's a terminating decimal. So we know that 3/5 as a decimal would be 6/10. Okay, and I'm going to write that so we can read it 6/10, because 6/10 reduces down to 3/5 as well. So we can kind of see how that works. Now we have to find the percent. So we're going to follow the rule. I'm going to go back 1 slide here. To go from a decimal to a percent, we're going to move the decimals 2 places to the right. So what I'm going to do is take this 6/10. I'm going to move the decimal 2 places to the right. 1, and I have to add a second one. So if I do that, it means it's 60. Right, so this number is 60, so the percent then becomes 60%. So it's quite easy to go between fraction, decimal, and percent. And that way was starting originally with a fraction. This time, let's start with a percent. So let's change this percent into a decimal. And this decimal we're going to do is we're going to drop the percent sign. And we're going to move the decimal from the back 2 places to the left. So as a decimal, this is going to be 42 hundredths, which helps us to find the fraction. Because the fraction, if we were to read this the way it is, 42 hundredths, then what we do is we would reduce it. If we can reduce it, this is also a correct answer, but we'd like to always have it in as reduced as it can be. So they're both even, so I'm going to reduce by 2. 42 divided by 2 is 21. And 100 divided by 2 is 50. So we can say then that the fraction is 21/50. So once again, we have found the percent, the decimal, and the fraction. So the first time we started with a fraction, this time we started with a percent. Our last example will start with a decimal. So we're going to take this decimal, and what we're going to do is we're going to get a percent, and we're going to get a fraction. It doesn't matter which one you choose to do first. Sometimes decimals and percents, those are easy to do. To go from a decimal to a percent, all we do is we move the decimal 2 places to the right, and we add a percent sign. So our percent then becomes 35%. And we want to decide what our fraction is. So what we're going to do is we're going to read this decimal, which is 35 hundredths. which once again is a good fraction, but we want to reduce it because if we reduce it, we get it to its simplest terms. 5 goes into both numbers, so 35 divided by 5 is 7, and 100 divided by 5 is 20. So we find out that the fraction equivalent for 35 hundredths is 7/20. So again, we have the decimal, we have the percent, and we have the fraction. So hopefully that helps you remembering fractions, decimals, and percents. So now let's go to the second topic. And the second topic was talking about proportions and percents. So we have to remember that when we talk about percent, we're talking about per hundred. That word cent means 100 in Latin. And you've heard of cent before. There are 100 cents in $1. There are 100 years in a century. There are 100 soldiers of centurions, a special Roman group of army unit. So when we see the word cent, that's Latin for 100. So we know that means per hundred. So we keep that in mind and we build a proportion. And this is the proportion we're going to use. Percent is of. So let me get a square here a second. At least if I can get one. And put around it. Because this is really important. Oops, I probably should do a rectangle. Let me get a rectangle. There we go. Okay, this is extremely important, this proportion, this fraction equaling a fraction, because that's what a proportion is, a fraction equaling a fraction. And what we want to do is we want to have the percent on one side, and we're going to have the part and the whole on the other, because that's what a percent means. We know that this cent will always be 100. This per is part. What part of 100 are we talking about? What's the percent? Is it 25%? We're talking 25 out of 100. So this is a part as well. That percent is a part. We're going to be looking for the words is and of when we're solving problems. And what will happen is we're going to get these three things from the problem. The percent, the is, or the of. We're going to get 2 out of the 3. The third one is the one that we have to figure out. So I just want you to watch this one. Don't take any notes. Just watch this. So here we have find 80% of 20. So we're given the percent, we're given the whole of 20. What we don't know is the is. What is the part? So the first thing we have to do is we have to set up the problem correctly. So when we go to set up the problem correctly, what we need to do is we're going to write our proportion, right? So remember that our proportion reflects this. Per divided by cent equals is divided by of. So what we're going to do is we're going to take this percent. We know we're going to set it up, and this is 100, and this is the other equal sign, fraction equaling a fraction. Here's the 80%, so we're going to put the 80 where it goes, where the percent goes, right? And then we're looking for the is, the part, and the of, and the whole. This is a whole, so that number goes in the denominator. That means what we're looking for, this question mark right here, this is what we're trying to find is the is. So what to do, instead of putting a question mark, we're going to use a variable called an x. And that's what we put in. We use variables when we don't know what the answer is, and we're trying to find out what it equals. So that's our first step, just really setting up the problem, reading it, and setting it up correctly. Then our next step is that we're going to cross multiply. So what I mean by that is we're going to cut across like an x. We're going to multiply these two sides, and we're going to multiply these two sides. Now, in doing so, this still stays equal. This maintains its equality. We're never losing this equality. So when we cross multiply, I will have 100 times x, which I don't know what that is, but I know what I put it together. It'll be 100x, whatever that x may be, I would multiply them together. Now, on this other side, I have 80 times 20. And if I use my calculator, I know that 80 times 20 is 1,600. So that's our first step. Is we're going to set up the problem, then we're going to cross multiply. Now we're not done yet. We don't know what x is. Some of you might be able to see it. 100 times something equals 1,600. Some of you already got some number in your head. So keep that in mind, because our next step is that we're going to divide by the number with the variable, and it changes. Don't always assume it's 100. It's going to be 100 in this one because we're looking for the is. If we were looking for the percent, or if we were looking for the of, we would be dividing by a totally different number. So it's not always 100. So it's really important to know that you're going to divide by the number with the variable. So whatever that number is. For us here, the number happens to be 100. So we're going to divide both sides by 100. We're going to use our calculator as well. So we know 100 divided by 100 is just 1. So 1 times x gives us that x. And then what we're doing is we're simplifying. We're going to use that calculator again and do 1600 divided by 100, and we get 16. So we're basically simplifying. So these are our steps. We're going to set up the problem. We're going to cross multiply. We're going to divide by the number with the variable, and then we're going to simplify. Those are our steps for solving a proportion. So what we're going to do is we're going to practice a few of them. I've got 4 of them in store for us here to practice. So let's start practicing together. What is 40% of 60? So remember, once again, I'm going to use my proportion and put 100 in that cents spot. I see that it's 40%, so I'm going to put that 40 in the percent spot. I have of 60, that's the whole. So that whole is going to go down below here, and I'm looking for the is. So I've got that far, and then I'm going to cross multiply. Once I cross multiply, I will get 100 times x equals 40 times 60, which is 2,400. Then I'm going to divide by the number with the x, which in this case happens to be 100. And then I get x, and 2,400 divided by 100 happens to be 24. So that's 20, and that's reasonable because it's a part of 60. It's not more than 60, it's a part of 60. So what we're going to do really quick is we're going to check our solution, because that's important when we're solving for a number or a variable. We're looking into this variable idea. What is this number equal? We want to make sure that this number works. So we're going to take this equation, put 24 in there, and make sure that it works. Now there's 2 ways to do this. You can just use your calculator and do 40 divided by 100, come up with an answer, 24 divided by 60, come up with an answer, and that would have both sides equal. Or the other way, which is again cross multiplying, which is faster, I think, because you can do a lot of it mentally, because 40 times 60 is 2,400 and 100 times 24 is 2,400. So since both sides are equal, that means that this is our solution. We're going to try it again in example number 5. What is 75% of 40? So once again, I'm going to set it up. 75% is, we don't know, but we know it's of 40. So what we're going to do once again is we are going to cross multiply, and when I do that, I get 100x equals, and 75 times 40 on my calculator is 3,000. Okay, then what we do is divide by the number that is with the variable. In this case, it's 100. And then we get x equals, and when we simplify, we find out it's 30. And that seems reasonable, 75%. That means 3/4 of it, of 40 is 30. That sounds reasonable. So again, we're going to check our solution, because that's what we do. So we're going to plug it in. 75 divided by 100, is it the same as 30 divided by 40? Some of you see that fraction commonality, so you see it and you know what's happening. Let's cross multiply, and we have 3,000 equals 3,000, so it works out. So we find out that this truly is our solution, that x is 30. Let's try looking for something else this time. Let's try to look for the percent. So this time we don't know what the percent is. So when we go to set this up, that's where we're going to put our variable of x, because we don't know the percent. But we know the whole part is 20 and the part is 4. So we still have our setup, and we're still going to do the same thing. Once we set it up, we're going to cross multiply. This time when we cross multiply, we get 20 times x, and over here 4 times 100 is 400. This time the number with the x is 20, so we're going to divide by 20 on both sides. And then you'll find out that the answer then is 20, and that seems reasonable. So let's double check it. We're going to check our solution. Oops, sorry about that. And we're going to plug it in and see if it works. 20 divided by 100, is that similar to 4 divided by 20? So if I cross multiply, I get 400 equals 400. Yep, that does work out. So I see that x equals 20 is my solution. We're going to try one more. This time, what we're going to look for, we want to know of what number. We want to know what the whole is. We got the part, we got the percent, we just don't know what the whole is. So this is going to be x down here. We don't know what that number is. But we do know we have 50%. So we're going to put 50 here and 35 here. So then when we go to cross multiply, right? I'm going to get my highlighter again. I know I like highlighting because you really can see what I'm doing. So we get 50 times x, which is 50x, and 35 times 100, which is 3,500. Okay? Then what we're going to do is we're going to divide both sides by 50. So let me do that. Divide by 50. And once I do that, I get x equals 70. And that seems pretty reasonable. Half of a number is 35. So isn't that like doubling that number? So if I double 35, wouldn't that be 70? So that's kind of a visual check and a knowledge check, but we're going to prove it with numbers because that's what we do. Okay, 35 over 70. And we're going to, again, cross multiply. And when we do that, we find out that 3,500 equals 3,500. Okay, so far we reviewed decimals, fractions, and percents. Now we've reviewed proportions and percents. Now we're going to pull all of this together and we're going to use it and we're going to talk about commission. So this is more of a 7th grade idea now when we're getting into word problems and using things. So let's talk about commission. A lot of people don't know what commission is. Well, commission happens to be the amount of money earned from the sale of an item. So when someone sells something, they make money, like a car, or maybe selling products door to door, or even shoe salesmen. They make a percentage of the item because at the end of the day, they are trying to earn money for themselves. So it's like a car salesman. Remember, they make money based on how many cars they sell, not per day, not per hour. So people working on commission are really usually very, very good salespeople. They use their sales experience and that's how they make their money. So the more they sell and the better they sell, the more money they make. So we'll take a look at this one example here about Wilma. She sells 10 shirts at $30 each and makes a 15% commission on each shirt that she sells. How much money does she make? Well, first of all, we have to figure out what was the total sales that she made, because she sold a lot, didn't she? Okay, we can see based on this story that she sold 10 shirts at $30 each. So let's take that 10 and multiply it times 30, and we know that her total sales was $300. Now, you have to remember, that's not how much money she made. That's how much money her company made. She sold for them $300. But what she needs to do and what she makes is she makes 15% commission on that. So she gets 15% of this $300. So let's set up our proportion. She gets 15%, so there's our percent. And over here, this is of the $300, so we're going to put the X there. We're going to cross multiply, so we get 100X, and 15 times 300 is 4,500. And then we're going to divide both sides by 100 because that's the number with the variable. And we find out that X equals 45. So how much money does she make? We think she's made $45 for selling those shirts. But we're going to check our solution because that's what we do, right? So we're going to plug it in. 15 times 100, is that equal to 45 over 300? So once again, we're going to cross multiply. And once I do that, I know 45 times 100 is 4,500. And with my calculator, I check 15 times 300 is also 4,500. So this works out. This is a good answer. Because this is a word problem, we need to make sure we put words or symbols. That's why we need to have the dollar sign there. How much money does she make? She makes $45 of that sale. So let's talk about Wilma one more time. Let's give her a promotion. Let's put her in management. So she gets a base salary now of $200 a week and a 20% commission on each shirt. This week she sold 25 shirts at $20 each. How much money did Wilma make this week? Well, let's kind of break this down a little bit. First of all, now she gets a base salary. Why does she get a base salary? Well, she gets a base salary because she's in management. Management does paperwork. She has more things to do. So now we know that Wilma, the amount of money that Wilma is going to make is going to be her base salary. And then we're going to take her base salary and we're going to add her commission to this. If we can do those two things, then we can find out how much money that she makes. So we're going to have a base salary and we're going to have a commission and we're going to add those together. So her base salary we know is $200. We've just got to figure out her commission. So let's see what she sold. She sold 25 shirts at $20 each. So what we're going to do is we're going to figure out what her total sales were, just like we did earlier. She gets a little bit more commission because she doesn't actually sell as much anymore because she's so busy doing paperwork. That's what you do in management. So 25 shirts times $20, right? And we come to find out that there are a total sales of $500. Now, is this the amount that we put in here? No, it's not. We don't put 500 there because that's the sales. That's not her commission. We are looking for her commission. The commission is what we're trying to find. So we're going to build a proportion. So we know she gets, where's our percentage? We're going to go up here. We know she gets 20%, right? So let's go here to our proportion and give ourselves 20%. We know that she makes $500 in sales, but we don't know how much of that is hers. What part of that $500 is hers? So we're going to cross multiply here, and I'm going to get 100x equals, and 500 times 20 happens to be 10,000. Okay, now I'm going to slide this down a little bit so we can get a little more working room here. And then what we're going to do now is we're going to divide by 100 so that I can get that x alone. And I find out that x equals 100. So this is $100. Her commission, she sold $500 in shirts. Guess what? $100 of that is hers. So we're going to put this $100 up here. So how much did Wilma make this week? Well, she makes a total of both of these things. So her total happens to be $300. So we want to make sure that we're reading the problem carefully and we're solving it correctly and we're setting up and showing our work. Once again, we should always check our solution. So I'm going to do that really quick over here to make sure that it is 100. 20 divided by 100 equals 100 divided by 500. We're going to cross multiply. 100 times 100 is 10,000. And 500 times 20 is also 10,000. So this seems to work out. It checks out. So this is the end of our review of everything you need to know about 6th grade. Thank you for listening.